Welcome, everyone. It's so good to see you. We have been live for the past couple of episodes, and so it's so nice to be in this intimate space. Once again, we are joined by an amazing group of individuals that I am so excited to introduce you to. And the topic today is unlearning alpha male messaging. I don't know if all of you watched that Netflix special, which of course now I can't remember what it was called, but probably because I blocked it out of my mind. But it was the topic of everybody's mind just a few weeks ago, and then we forgot about it because other things happened. What's super exciting and what you should stay for is that some of our guests today, I'm not even sure we're allowed to talk to them. As an American, and one of them is Canadian, I'm not sure we're allowed to be friends. So this is like very, subversive that they would even show up. How exciting is that? But we are going to delve into this. But before we do, let's take a breath together, find our way fully here. Deep inhale in and a deep exhale out. I don't know if you all can hear that, but T'Challa took it really seriously. He's snoring in the background. Let's invite these guests up today. Joining us from the Boise, Idaho, is the great Brian Fretwell, the founder of Finding Good, a company dedicated to helping people have more meaningful conversations. His methodology uses the science behind connection to make listening less transactional and more transformation. Brian, welcome. How are you?
Yeah, I'm great. Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to engage the conversation here. Yeah.
I know. I mean, this is a conversation we're seeing happen more and more. I think what started as a French conversation is becoming more mainstream. Can you start today by telling us what is this language even mean? What is alpha male messaging? Where did that come from?
Yeah, so my interpretation of it came from a misunderstanding, right? Like
Mm,
the term alpha male, and I'm really loose on the science here, but I know there was a study come out in the 70s that people reference as like the lead wolf. And the reason I know it is because my work on connection is actually rooted in some of those earlier studies. And the idea was that there was one alpha male that led and that was the strongest and that sort of thing. And that's kind of reinforced in a false understanding of like Darwinism as well, that the
yes.
strongest survive kind of mentality that when you actually dig into the research, it's not the strongest that survive, it's the ones that can build community. Full stop, right? And the
Full
iteration.
stop, full
Yeah.
stop on what you just said. I think you need the episode's over. Brian said it
Right.
all. Can you say that again?
Yeah.
That
It,
is
it, when you think about it actually in terms of like thousands of years ago, it was like if you were the strongest and the most brutal, that would not increase the chances that you live necessarily. It would increase the chances that you might win a fight. But at the end of the day, when you go to sleep, you have to have people around that you trust to watch for the bears, right? You have to, and just exchanging of resources, and not just resources of food and who could hunt or who can pick blueberries, which is a reference we always use, but again, who's going to be watching while you're sleeping? And if it's just a
mm,
bunch of people that are afraid of you, you're not going to sleep very well. But if it's people that trust you, that is the tribe that is going to survive. And then when you really get into connection, the more we understand each other and our strengths and what we do, the more effective we're going to be as a pack, right? As a group
mm.
against other packs, or building a broader pack, so that again, like that's this survival feature. And if you just have one blustery, quote unquote tough person in there, in short term, sure, it can give you an advantage, but it gives you this advantage that also comes with a whole lot of risk that again, I'd say makes it really hard to sleep at night.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Let's get our next panelist up here because already, Brian, you're confusing people because they're like, he's got like such a great man beard. So clearly he must be alpha.
And, I,
Uh,
and I'm from Idaho. I grew up around farms, branding cattle, like played rugby, like worked in mining operation. Anyway, sorry.
yeah. So you're fucking with their mind. They're like, he's the picture of
Yeah.
alpha, and he's telling me that that's not enough. Back again on the virtual couch is Professor Neil Sheminsky, a Canadian English professor at Cambrian College, a writer whose work on superheroes has been published in journals such as the International Journal of Comic Art and Men and Masculinities. He is co-editor of Spaces and Places of Canadian Popular Culture, a former PhD student in social and political thought, and has an MA in English and a TSL diploma for English language teaching. Also, many of us follow him almost exclusively on Instagram, especially when I want to feel any idea that I ever had about men is being validated. I'm not sure that's what you want me to be using it for, Professor Neil, but
I am happy to see that a variety of people make use of the video content that I put out there in a variety of ways, which is ideal, right? I don't want to be just prescriptive here. You extract what meaning and usefulness and utility that you can.
yeah. But can you jump in, right in the deep order here, because
Mhm.
we're about to have this, deep conversation, challenge some big ideas that
Mhm.
many people, whether it is people who've been cultured as male or people who love them, and the kind of pervasive thought that I hear anytime we engage in a conversation like this or we read some great authors who have written on this is, well, those are not real men.
Mm.
Those are not strong men. Those are queer men, right? They they don't have wives. What do we do with that person who's already wanting to discount any conversation that we have? What's your offering for them?
Mm. Well, there's more than one possible strategy to employ here, right?
Mm,
This is one of the wonderful things about working in the social media landscape, by the way, is that there are so many voices trying so many different things. That if my approach doesn't land with you, I'm sure that there's another one out there that could speak to you, that could speak your language. And with the example that you're presenting with me with here, um, I like to pull a little bit at the logic that they're employing. So for instance, if I'm not a real man, okay, well, what makes someone a real man? And what often happens when I ask these sorts of probing questions is that we get into a set of behaviors, into roles and identities that people have been socialized into. Um, which then allows me to point out like, oh, okay, so a real man then is evidently a social construction.
mm,
And then they back away and they're like, whoa, well, no, like I'm not saying that you can become a man or you can choose to be, you are born a man. I'm like, no, no, because then I would be a real man. Like
mm,
I need you to choose a lane. And what often happens when engaging with misogynist arguments is that you find that the contradictions just pile up one on top of the other. And they start to collapse under their own weight.
yeah.
And that's where sometimes, not all the time, sometimes you can find an opening. Okay, let's actually start to investigate this then. Let's start talking about, maybe we can redefine what you mean by real man. Maybe we can expand the category a little bit. Or maybe I can lead you to a place where you realize that this label, this term is not helping any of us.
Mm, mm. Let's let's get right into this. And I want to name for all of those who follow and watch this show quite regularly that you may notice something different in today's episode, which is that I'm going to lean back quite a lot. And so that's going to center Brian and Neil in a way that sometimes we have heard in your feedback when I do that feels quite triggering because it feels like I'm letting two cis white men talk over me. And so I'm making it very clear that this is a choice that I am making because I do not move through the world as a man. I was not cultured as a man. And so I am consciously choosing to let them lead this conversation. And I'm just going to set up their expertise. So just take a breath to let that marinate. There's a difference between when somebody is talking over us and we are ceding our power, and when I am choosing from a state of empowerment to allow people to lead a conversation that I do not believe I am meant to lead. That said, can we delve in? What is the energy, or what is the payoff around really subscribing to this alpha male rhetoric or this character? What do you think the benefit is to the young man, to the old man who really wants that character to be valid?
It's, from my perspective, it's the idea of community. Like, we
Mm.
need connection at the same level we need food and water. And my first job was teaching in a juvenile corrections facility in my 20s. And what we understand is that, like, the more disconnected someone is, the lower their self-awareness. And so when I don't have a way of defining myself, having someone else define me actually provides safety from an unconscious standpoint, but also provides the safety my brain is looking for in an established path. And just like we tell people all the time, like, gangs are really good at providing community. They're amazing case studies in how do you build a good culture? Well, like, follow them, because that's what they're doing, right? And these movements are very tied to very disconnected, lonely, isolated populations, because they provide a here's where you fit in. Here, you don't have to do the work of discovering yourself. We've actually discovered you for you. And that provides this sort of short term, that allows their brain to not be kind of overwhelmed with the fear of who I am, who am I accepted, do people like me, that then they're actually taught that that's not a fear at all, when that's actually the fear that they're playing off of, right?
Yeah,
Well, and that was my follow-up question. Sorry, I just want you to double
oh,
click on
no, no,
that
no.
for a second. If part of that uh, invitation to that culture is to also convince myself that I don't experience fear, then how do you connect with somebody who you're saying you're choosing this as a coping strategy for your fear, while they're simultaneously eradicating any sense that they feel fear?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I being told you don't have fear and not having fear are two different things, right? And
Mhm.
so, I the for me, the displacement, if you will, is the thing that got them to accept a culture that says alpha male or whichever, is somebody was interested in them. And
Mm.
the offset, the way to pull in the other direction, is using the same tool, but using it better, right? So it's not, I mean, none of us like being told who we are, what to do, what we should or shouldn't think. Everyone does like, all of us enjoy having someone authentically interested in us. And that's, for me, that's the mechanism to even start the conversation. If I'm approaching somebody that, like, I value you because I want to change you,
Mm.
versus I value you just as you are, even with these beliefs, even with these things that may even harm me. I'm going to find valuable things in you because I know they're there. And in that, we set the groundwork that then we can have this other discussion, right?
Wow. Dr. Neil, what's coming up for you?
Yeah, a lot. I wanted, as you were talking, Brian, I was thinking that I think we end up in the same place, but I think through the question a little differently, which is that part of the appeal here is that what you are given by these voices in the manosphere are a set of instructions. You know, it's you're given a little booklet. You know, every piece of you is arranged chaotically on the floor, and how do the pieces fit together? Well, here is a step-by-step guide. You don't have to worry anymore. I have taken care of it. I will put you together, and you will perform the function that you were meant to perform.
Mm.
And isn't that a reassuring thing to hear if your life already feels like it's chaotic? That somebody can give you the guidelines that you need to follow. And then Brian, you made a comment about using the tools, but using them better. And this is actually funny because it speaks to something, Lindsey, that you said before we started, which was to leave the character at the door. And this is, and maybe I'm jumping the gun here in moving into sort of how I operate online. But I do have a character. You know, it is me. It is an amplified version. And part of it is using some of the tools that these influencers on the manosphere in the manosphere use, and trying to turn it back on.
Mm.
And to cite one example there, because it's come up in so many conversations I've had with people who would like to work with me, is they say, because I will ask them, why are you interested in working with me? And they say, look, we're not cool. We know that the kids, the young men that we want to reach, part of the appeal here of the manosphere is that the people that are speaking to them are cool, and they make the kids and the young men feel cool too. So
Mm.
we need somebody who can meet that energy, which feels like a tremendous amount of pressure to to put on anyone.
You got the Riz, Dr.
Um,
Neil.
that that's not my words. Um, but this is the feedback that I get is like, look, you look like you could be one of them,
Mm.
and we need somebody who looks and sounds like they look and sound in order to get just our foot in the door, which is such a challenge for reasons like what Brian was mentioning. Like we have to, it has to feel authentic, has to feel like, yeah, I'm asking you to come into yourself, not I am trying to transform
Yeah.
And that's the part that is using the tool and using it better. Because if I'm,
you.
because when I'm trying to get you into the alpha male or whichever, like, like predefined, right, definition of who you are supposed to be,
Mhm.
and that's my only reason for getting you in, then my interest is going to go here, but eventually it's going to fall off because you didn't go here, right? And using
Mm.
it better is being interested because I know understanding you as a human is ultimately going to benefit both of us.
Mm.
That me like doing the work of trying to understand your experience and to learn from what you've done and to just like find what we talk about all the time is finding myself in your story
Yes.
ultimately benefits both. And if that's my purpose, then I will outlast the person trying to recruit you into something all day long, right?
Mm.
And people will pick up on that, right? But that's hard to stay into when we see the culture you're in is actually causing direct harm, right? And I yeah, I think about that all the time because we're all affected by, that cultural mentality, right?
So I'm confused. Isn't feminism to blame? Isn't that the reason that men are struggling with mental health and with partnering with
I
their, romantic partner
right.
desires?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and let Neil get that one.
Well, Brian, you had used gangs as
Mhm,
an analogy here. One that I often use are cults.
mhm,
Mm.
And what is part of the process of a cult indoctrinating new members? It's that us versus them mentality. It's the construction of an external enemy. somebody that can bind us together, because we share an interest that is actively opposed by that external enemy. And feminism is such a convenient enemy to name, especially when we build up this version of it that is actively opposed to men, that is man hating. Then my brother, I reach out to you. We are in this together, and we gotta we have to come together. We have to work together. We have to fight it if we want to survive. Feminism is quite an easy target.
And I want to reference something you said a little bit ago, Neil, because you were talking about like, oh, they're giving me a pathway, they've given me all the answers, giving me step by step. I think that we get caught into the, is it masculine, is it feminine? Like, what are the causes of these things? But I think some of the real larger causes that are kind of out of all of our hands to a degree is like income inequality right now, and the change in the social contract. Because when you were outlining that, well, that's, as a Gen Xer, I was sold on the idea of go to college, work hard, you're going to get, and that like that paradigm that I bought into fully was like, no. And then, oh, by the way, you're neurodiverse, which I didn't know, right? Like, oh, that doesn't work for you either, right? And we want those structures that we can rely on, and we like the certainty in the future that those structures provided is gone, right?
Yeah.
And so our brains want certainty, because that's what allows us to sleep, right? And so those, like, understanding that these places that we find definitions for ourselves rather than our definition being expressed in those places provide that certainty. It's a shortcut to it, but when there doesn't seem to be another path to it, it's human nature to take the shortcut, right? Because that's survival, right?
This is interesting, and I've been asking this question a lot, because, well, first I want to say, because it has to be said, 3 Gen Xers here, and damn, we are aging well. Now that said, I find this argument fascinating. I was listening to an interview with a researcher out of one of the UCs, I think, and she had gone to study in Appalachia, which is where I grew up. Pittsburgh is considered the Paris of Appalachia. And she was talking about, this disenfranchisement and the demise of coal, which really led that space, things like PPG Glass, all of these companies that were really bedrocks in Pittsburgh. And her book, from what I understand, was an invitation to this empathy for these men who had lost their industry, who had lost that sense of pride in what they could provide for their families. And I found myself kind of like, because in that, what I would say is that recently, as a result of certain executive orders coming out of our federal government, almost half of our company contracts have disappeared, right? And our market is all of a sudden oversaturated with people looking for work and less contracts. And never once in my life have I thought, who's to blame for this? Men. Who's to blame for this? White people. Right? Like, so help me. This turned into a therapy session. Help me make that jump. And also my bias as a woman moving through this world, where I'm wanting my counterparts to have accountability of their own. Is any of this making sense? Like, help me find the empathy when I feel as though I wouldn't do the same thing.
So my initial response is give it time. And I'll approach this from my specific, so 3 years ago when trigger warning on the suicide part. 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago, and now my father took his own life. And he did that after he was a truck driver and he owned his own truck. He got glaucoma in his right eye, couldn't drive anymore, right? And was relegated into working from home. And I've written about this and chatted about it, but the long story short on that is he did not see his value outside of providing an income. Like he like so many of the, like, I was lucky to have some time before he decided to make that choice where I got to ask him about his experience and his stories and you know and allow him to feel valued, but also because I was getting the value from him, right? But even in that interaction, he couldn't see that him being there and having conversations with his grandkids and being around other kids and teaching and learning, if it wasn't tied to income, meant he wasn't valuable. And that's something that, like, as a cis white male, is like conditioning. Like it's the book I wrote is very much about like the years that I spent where, you know, not being the person bringing the value and how scary that was. And in going back to kind of what I flippantly said, it's like, wait, fear over time makes enemies everywhere, right? And so that like, if I don't know the path forward because my industry is gone and I was a hammer person and I can't do a hammer, and now not only is my industry gone, the whole thing that makes me feel like I'm delivering value is gone. It's just a matter of time. If there's not another path that I can see, that I will find an enemy, right? And that's not excusing it, right? And maybe that won't happen over time for some people, hopefully not. But I do think that, like, it fear does really, really crazy things to people, right? Like, fear makes us, you know, and one of those things is finding enemies where there aren't, because at least it gives us something to focus on, right?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question about empathy, especially when the people that you're hearing from, you know, the people who are very loudly assigning blame and naming enemies. I think it's important to place them over here, and for us to recognize that isn't necessarily reflective of even the majority of people whose voices we will never hear, who will never jump online and write comments, record videos, and who ultimately whose internal experiences we just aren't being exposed to. And I make this differentiation, or at least I attempt to make this differentiation in the work that I do online, where it's those alpha men who I am responding directly to that I am addressing, and not necessarily the people who, you know, operating perhaps from a place of fear, have signed up for their courses or become members of whatever subscription they're offering. Because it's those alpha men, in many cases, aren't even engaging sincerely in this talk.
They are the most afraid.
Sure. And most afraid, even for reasons that have nothing to do with the sort of situation that was experienced by people like Brian's father. Um, I, at the risk of taking this slightly off track, anytime you see one of these alpha male coaches caught somewhere in public, you see that it is a character, that this is just the branding that we're seeing on, that they're not even engaging authentically in what they're doing. They're not trying to achieve some sort of cultural transformation. They're trying to make money. And so for when it comes to them, I would not expect you to find empathy. But unfortunately, they take up so much space. And so if you find yourself struggling when you hear these men complain about everything that women and people of color and DEI has taken from them, I'm not surprised that you're having difficulty understanding or appreciating where they're coming from, because for many of them, they are not coming from anywhere good. This is a business for them.
Yeah. Wow. 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 I think 40% of the people that regularly tune into Unlearning tell us that they identify as male, and the other 60% are various genders. And I think it's important that we are able to discuss both sides of it, where you have a community that, as you were both speaking, I was reminded of, there's a beautiful poem that I will not recite now, but it's in the book, Cry, My Beloved Country. And that was what was coming to mind, right? This call for nurturing, this call for community, this call for their pain being recognized, but then this disconnect on the other side where you have a community saying, "Are you fucking shitting me? You from where we are sitting have all the privilege, have all the opportunity." And that is what seems to be playing out in our social media and in our
Mhm.
news. Both populations crying to be seen, to be heard, to be validated. And then, as you just really clarified for us, Dr. Neil, this other population that's moving them all like puppets on strings, keeping them fighting amongst themselves.
Yeah, there will always be people out there looking for an opportunity to make a buck,
Mm,
especially in crisis, right? And selling solutions to the problem that are anything but.
yeah.
And if you're just thinking about the algorithm part of that, like when I think
Mm,
about, and I hate hearing it, like I, I, I try to curate my social media very consciously. And every once in a while, I will say something that lights some people up because I think you need to do that. But then I hear like, oh, there's people arguing on your post. That's really good because it drives engagement. And I just cringe on that. Like it's true, but it's also not like just because it drives engagement and then I get a little bit of a kickback or money here doesn't mean it's creating anything good. But that's
Mm,
easy to fall into. It actually is very like that, and I don't know how much you've experienced that, Neil, but like I feel that like, oh, I could say it this way, and I would light some people up, and I would get a million views on this, and then I can just act like, well, this is just my opinion, and I don't like, I can act like I'm not responsible for part of that. And that's something that like we see in a lot of like influencers and a lot of like is, oh, I'm just doing this and I don't like, well, but you're responsible, right? If you like
mm,
to shirk the responsibility of the impact of the interactions you're creating is just removing yourself from culpability that is easy to correlate to your actions, right?
yeah, yeah. This is something that I've been working in social media short form videos for 4 years now, and it's gotten to the point where I experience a feeling of dread when there is a viral video. A video with a million views almost certainly means exactly what you were describing, Brian, that the comments have already devolved into a series of arguments. Um,
mm,
and I once had somebody reach out to me on one of these posts to say that without getting into details that they were feeling targeted and they were feeling harassed. And I went in and I deleted the comments and blocked the person who was targeting her. And she said to me in a follow-up message, "Thank you, but I would really appreciate it if you could be more on top of this." And I had to say to her, I get on an average day across my social media channels, I get about 1,000 comments.
Mhm.
If it's a viral video, like that could be thousands of comments on just that one video. And saying like,
Mhm.
I have a full-time job, I have 2 children. I look at the comments when I can, and
Mhm.
especially if somebody flags something for me, yeah, I'll go in and I'll find the time. But that issue of responsibility, I really wrestle with that because I cannot give these videos and comments the attention that they really need sometimes. And I will just cross my fingers and hope that if something truly awful happens, that somebody will let me know because I may not see it.
Mm.
And and the other part of that is like, you know, like I tell people all the time that like, how can you let them say that about you? And I tell them they're not saying anything about me. They're saying a character. They're making a comment about a character they saw 1 minute of,
Mm.
right? They like a snapshot of me that is representative of whatever's going on in their life. And the other part is like when you talk about like regulating those comments, like how many of those are actual people?
Mhm.
Question.
You because there are entire I'll go in and I'm happy. I'll every once in a while jump on for an hour at a time just blocking people because I enjoy the heck out of it. And I will go find this. I will often like click on the person because that's how you have to block them in the first place. You click on them. Oh, 0 posts and they follow 4 people. Oh yeah, this is a computer in, you know, some other country or even, you know, some farm here in the US and like block pretty easy. Like kind of like whack-a-mole, right? Like and
Yes.
and and it's funny, people are like, "Oh, aren't you worried about?" I was like, they don't know them, me, I don't know them, and you know, like, yeah,
Yeah,
uh,
that's the new Gen X video game, going in and blocking people on our social media. Dun, 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 dun,
yeah,
dun,
yeah.
dun, 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 dun.
I, I
Um,
I like it when somebody comments like, "This was a waste of time." I was like, "Cool, you don't have to waste any more time anymore. Not a problem. Bye bye now." Yeah.
don't fuck with us. We were all latchkey kids. You don't got time for us. We don't got time for you.
Yeah,
Here,
there it is.
here first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, let me make this easier for you. Yes.
Paint me a picture of healthy masculinity. What is that?
I,
How do you play it?
yeah, I've been asked this question before, and I realize that this is an unsatisfying answer for a lot of people. Um, but the short answer is that if I were to paint that picture, there isn't just any one picture.
Mm,
I think a lot of the difficulties that we run into, and this is sort of setting it up as the inverse of that step-by-step guide instruction booklet, right? It's getting people to a place where they are comfortable um, revealing and developing what is authentically them.
mm,
Releasing yourself from the restrictions and the limitations that have been imposed on you, that you have learned, that you have acquired, which I don't mean to make any of that sound simple or easy because it is incredibly difficult. Even just to
mm,
think of it in terms, as Brian was describing earlier, growing up with that provider mentality, that my primary use and value is in earning money and taking care of the people who are dependent on me. And shedding that identity or being able to modify it is incredibly challenging. And yet I think the starting point for a healthy practice of masculinity is being able to let go, to release some of what we've been taught is essential to a stereotypical masculine identity, and to be able to then embrace what is stereotypically feminine.
mhm,
And one of the, I'm doing it in this video right now. One of the ways that I like to socially signal when I am in settings like this, I love floral prints. I
mhm,
always wear a floral print when I am speaking at some sort of public event. I get a lot of compliments. It feels good. but it's one of the little ways that I like to signal to other people, like um I'm trying to demonstrate my openness and willingness to be a little more exploratory in the way that I express and perform my gender. So yeah, healthy masculinity um, requires that sort of openness.
How about for you,
Yeah,
Brian?
I don't know. I'm struggling to answer that in as much as I very much agree with Neil. Like, it's whatever definition you want to have. And if it feels like you, but that comes with a caveat, right? Like, if I have low self-awareness, like things feel like me because they don't feel like the thing I don't want to have, right?
Mm,
And that's the same with masculinity and femininity, like that or any other way we want to define ourselves. It's that, like, that changes. But like, masculinity maybe to me today is different than, certainly different than it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago for me. And so I wouldn't profess to have a definition of that I would want to put on someone else, because that would distract them from the work we have as humans, is to figure out who this is. And who this is, we figure out in community.
yeah.
And the more I rest myself into a definition of who I am, the more I limit my access to community, right? Because then that definition becomes rigid, and that
Mm,
definition becomes that it what it takes away is the curiosity.
Mm,
And when curiosity goes, so does community. They're like, this is the work we've been doing for 5 years is really just like, those two things are so highly correlated. And so for me, it's, like, whether it's masculine or feminine, am I consistently curious, and am I engaging my community in a way that helps me discover different versions of who I am, so that, I'm continuing to understand that. Because once I'm done understanding that, that's just sounds boring, honestly. Like, but it also removes any of the tension that we actually need in life, right? The struggle that is part of human existence. And we have these tendencies to want to remove that tension in seek of comfort, or or safety, and never finding either one, right?
that's I just Brian, I need to say that you managed to use the two words that I frequently deploy when people ask me questions of this sort. I'm like, what's the short answer to how do we solve this problem with toxic masculinity? And I usually begin with two words: community, curiosity.
mm,
Which,
So when you said curiosity, I was like, oh, this is my perfect opportunity to jump in with my spiel about curiosity. And like, oh, wow, you just covered it. And it's like, yeah, that rigidity, that trap, because there were sociologists in the 1980s who they called it the man box.
mhm,
Before we had the term toxic masculinity, they said there's this box that you have to fit into. You have to hit these 7 criteria to fit
mhm.
into it. And
Mhm,
don't you dare expand outside the box. Um, and that is the where we are placed in the rigidity, that rigid structure that we are forced into if we are not curious. Uh,
mhm,
and it's one of the reasons that, healthy masculinity is not just one thing, precisely because, as you
mhm.
were saying, we're still growing and changing and evolving. Even at
Yeah.
our ages here today, now, we are not going to be the same people in 10 years. We
Mhm.
might not be the
Hope
same
not.
people at the end of the year.
Right.
And so we have to remain curious and open, and willing to follow whatever direction our lives might take us.
And I'm almost laughing, Neil, because literally just in the last 2 weeks, so we've been creating this framework for 5 years, and so much of it's been exploratory. But this is no kidding. Just in the last 2 weeks, we we're seeking a trademark on the term and bought the website Connection Curiosity. because we're defining a new type of curiosity that is like that really that connects those two, which even in my profile it says listening is the biggest tool, and we're actually removing that, because now we much more believe like no, it's curiosity, because you can listen and not connect with someone, but if you are curious about who they are, what they've done, where they've done, and you understand the benefit of that curiosity to you, and we believe we're very much biologically designed for that interaction. So as you said that, I was like, oh, you're gonna love the website that we're putting.
I'm looking forward to seeing it.
Yeah.
Unlearning, where we build other cults led by Brian Steele. We're making a bro club, and I got a secret
That's right.
invite now.
There it
I'm
is.
in the club.
Yeah,
Don't try to kick me out of the club
Charter
now,
member.
because we can all talk about perimenopause at our first meeting. I'm wondering, one, as you're talking about that, one of the things I see so much with my clients, or even when I'm, teaching classes, is when we talk about community, I see so many of my male clients, that face that dogs make, where they're like, why are you doing that? Like that, And I ask them, you know what I mean by community? And they're like, nope. Right. And I was telling you all before we started recording, I'm in a play that's coming up. And one of the most amazing things about it is that the play is a cast of 7 women of various ages. And when the director is also a woman, most of the stage managers are women. And we go in and out of performing and practicing these monologues, but also you could almost just record us in community with one another being the play, because at one, we're braiding each other's hair. We're, oh girl, you got the lick my finger, right? Like, and already with my 12-year-old son, I'm trying to make sure that he doesn't lose this, because I see his sister who's 10 years old. It's second nature. And already he seems to be falling into that space where the boys that he is growing up with are engaging differently already at 12. How do we stop that? And is it that we stop that? What is the advice for the parent, for the teacher, for the community member who's trying to say, we want to allow our little men to remain curious and connected?
If either of us had an answer that I think that we could offer off the tip of our tongue, we would be very eagerly sharing it. But this is the question, right? This is the question that so many of us have been wrestling with. And I think that the short answer is talking to our boys.
Yeah.
Trying to remain to keep, especially because at that young age, those lines of communication are still fresh. They're still healthy. But the forces acting on them, online, the social pressures coming at them out of school are immense. And no, it's no easy task.
Yeah, for me, I often start by asking, like, what's our definition of community or connection? Because some of the things we find in our work is like, when we think of, there's a bias that we have when we talk about things like connection and community. And the bias is, and it was our bias too, because we use the word listening. Listening isn't necessarily connection. And what we think about when we think about listening is this passive thing. I'm going to hold space for you, right? And that the problem with that is then one person, like, it's not an equal exchange. How we look at it is community is contribution. And so I need to know my contribution and yours. And we think about it neurobiologically, right? Years ago, if we were a pack and we were sitting around a campfire, we think about the contribution in terms of resources. You get blueberries, meat, or whatever you bring. But the real contribution we're looking for is like when you run off and find blueberries, how did you find them? Where did you find them? What did you do? That's how our brains establish this need for story. But in our exchanges, and especially when we see these, and I use my wife and I as a, she's a counselor and I'm in this work. So luckily we get to approach things very straightforward, or at least because of my neurodiversity, I force her to do that straightforward. And 10 years ago, we would have conversations and I would lose myself in the conversation. And I don't know how to define this. I was maybe dumb enough to say like, hey, what are you telling me this for? Right? Which went over really well the first couple of times, right? But what I'm asking is like,
later.
Yeah, fair. Yeah, she's done some work. Anyway, but that but that I need to be needed in that. And with women, and this is just a broad approach, they understand that listening, like they more often feel like in listening they are providing. Where with men, and part of this is socialized in different things, like what do you want me to provide? Because we see providing as I'm going to dump information on you, right? And I actually want you to come in and say, I need this or I don't need this, because we only want to give you information when we feel it's valuable or necessary. And so this definition of like, how is this contributing and how are you contributing, which then starts to like, how do we get more intentional about asking for what we need in the conversation, but from each other? And how do we get more intentional about what are we providing to each other as the definition of connection starting and community starting in the conversation? And that starts to change that, years ago, if I just walked in and my wife was like, how was your day? I was like, were you taking a test tomorrow? Like, I don't know what do you want to know? And now we can switch that with generally like, she went to a Buddhist university and she practices, her counseling practice is very unique and there's a lot of overlap with neuroscience. And so now I say, hey, tell me about your most, interesting interaction today. Tell me about when you used a tool. And now I'm asking for the value, right, in that. And that's not taught. And again, back to the bias, there's this bias that like, we're supposed to just listen passively and that's how we show care, which I'm not saying that's not important. We have to kind of change some of these approaches to, and I always use the word contribution. Like, what are you bringing? What are you bringing? Because then we can like step back and say, oh, everybody has a contribution.
Yes.
If we know how to find it, right? And so now it's not your job to work up some good story that you think is going to be interesting. It's actually my job to find the story in you that's interesting, right? Because like, you don't want to tell a story to somebody who's not interested, right? But if I leave it to you to tell any story, then I have to, find the interest in there, versus like if I go to you for the contribution of the story, I'm automatically interested, and that's the thing that makes you want to tell that. So
I love that.
It's just this, I don't know if any of that made sense, but I think that like it's really getting into how do we define connection and community? Because however we're defining it right now is leaving a lot of people out.
Yes. No, I love both of those offerings. And as you were saying that, Brian, what comes up is my 12-year-old, he loves to talk about work and to provide coaching, right? So, due to COVID, they were here doing work, listening to me work with clients for many years. And so now, he'll be at dinner and he's like, well, what tool did you pull out? How did you help them move through their defenses? Did you maybe try this? And I'm like, good idea, buddy. I'll try that in my next session with
Mhm.
them. So he loves to be in there providing a
Mhm.
contribution. I love that. I love
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
I don't want to make any assumptions about the way that the two of you were raised, but I think back to my own childhood, and this is something that I've talked to my mother about since. Um, and there's this comment that she made once, and this was a conversation I had with her when I was already an adult, where I just asked her, why did you seem so much less actively involved in my life than the lives of my siblings? And she said, well, I didn't worry about you. I know
Mm,
you're going to be fine. Um, and of course, my thought was probably should have been a little more worried. Like you didn't know what was going on.
yeah.
Um, and I think this speaks as well to what both of you are saying. Like part of the solution is just active involvement in
Mm,
the daily lives and experiences. I love that your 12-year-old is picking up on what you were doing at work and then like asking you questions about your practice. Like that's incredible. And like my parents are lovely, wonderful people. I love them. I don't want to give the impression that that is not the case. Um, but they were accustomed to parenting being about putting out fires.
mhm.
And if you weren't on fire visibly, then go about your life, go about your day, and we'll get back to you if it looks like there's trouble.
Yeah.
And that sort of approach, which I think was quite common when we were growing up, is not going to serve us well right now.
Mm,
Mhm.
yeah. Yeah. I would offer, as somebody watching the way my male cousins were parented, it seemed that they were only given attention when they were performing, and
Mm,
often some sort of athletic feat of some sort. Whereas you could see the way that those that were being cultured as girls were given a different type of more affection,
mm,
more storytelling exchanges, right? Storytelling that happened over the making of food, too. And so that I see so much of what you are both sharing around if my identity is so tied to my performance and none of that stuff in between. Mm,
mm. It's a great point. It's absolutely gendered in this way.
Yeah, and
100%.
yeah.
I was sort of lucky because I think about the first like when I think about this interaction, I think about one of the more important earlier interactions for me, and it's a story I tell quite often. But like when I was young, we didn't have money, pretty abusive kind of upbringing. Some of the coaches knew that, and I was in sports, but I'm 6'4". I tell people I got all my height in 1 year, so it was like a brand new giraffe, pretty awkward, right? And I would get laughed at pretty consistently. But I would go to these workouts every day because I lived only 4 blocks from the high school, and they had punching bag and all of this stuff. And one thing I knew how to do was work hard from my dad, who's a former Marine, right? And
Mm,
I remember at a practice one day, and super small town, so there was like 10 of us there, and this coach Bob, who's since passed away, he looks around the group and he asks everybody, like, I want you to tell me what position you're going to play. I had no idea. I couldn't even name off the positions really. And so he was going down the list, and people were confidently saying, I'm going to be this, I want to be that. And he got to me and he was like, well, position, I just kind of froze. And he looked, and I remember him saying, like, hey, I've seen how you show up every day, and I see the work you put in, and with that you can do whatever you want. And then later he started talking to me about, I seen what you've been through, I seen what's brought you here, and I can tell you, if you use that, you can go wherever. And what he was doing was valuing my story. and
Mm,
helping me find value in the story versus the value in the output, right? And I think that's what we find in sports and performance culture is if when the value is on the output, happiness is always over the hill, right? Love is over the hill, like connect, all of that is
mm,
when you hit the output. And as we know, like as soon as you hit that, it's then over the next hill and the next output. When the value is in the story, the output is just a place to celebrate the celebration you've been having the whole time, right? It's the output should be where you're celebrating for with others, right? It's in the
mm.
story that you know the value is derived, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. I could talk to you both for the rest of today, and the producers are telling me I'm not allowed to do that. Um, so, and I'm trying to, I've got like three final questions that I want to ask, and I'm trying to choose which one for today. But I think, you know, there's a sense right now that uh, the world over, there seems to be a pull to the kind of strong man, alpha male leader. To what you said, someone who will tell me what to think, tell me how to worship, tell me what kind of binary belief I should adhere to, right? No nuance. Gender, binary. Who should be in control? Binary. Money, good. Values, bad, right? What is your hope for the person who's listening today and is being pulled towards that energy? But this person tells me that they'll figure it all out for me. This person will tell me that I don't have to feel because feeling is hard and it's tiring and it's messy. This person is telling me that every bad idea, every bad instance that happened to me is not my fault, it's somebody else's fault. What's your final offering to them today?
Well, who wants to go first?
Good.
I mean, there are a couple of things that I think I would say here. One is uh, the purely human personal appeal. Um, yes, maybe they can make things easier for you, but at what cost?
Mm,
Like at the expense of cutting yourself off from a piece of your humanity, because invariably that's what happens. But I would, for somebody who is not quite at that point of saying like, look, they're giving me the easy answers. They're giving me the directions, and all I have to do is follow. Wonderful. Um, I do also want to speak to people who are somewhere maybe in the middle between the space that we occupy here and now and those who are drawn to the strong man, because a lot of people are just scared at where they see the world headed, right? Um, and that's to offer the idea that none of this is inevitable. You know,
mm,
we we can turn back, we can turn away from this, we can change things up until, you know, the day that this all ends, whether that's our lives or our world. We always have an opportunity to pull back. And what I like to suggest is there is this term in psychology called an extinction burst.
mhm,
And it describes when a behavior is amplified because it's no longer being reinforced or rewarded the way it once was. And so there's this flurry of activity to try and reassert the behavior so that you can get the reward back. See, if it will be given to you. But if you don't receive it, it's called an extinction burst because that's the moment where the behavior drops off.
mhm.
Um, because it's no longer serving you anymore. And my hope here is that what we're witnessing is an extinction burst. We're seeing, after decades of progress, the return to some older form of authoritarian, masculine, supremacist forms of leadership. And already we're seeing the signs that countries, that groups of people are rejecting it. Here in my own country, we were headed to the election of somebody who modeled himself after Donald Trump. Donald Trump took office, and in less than a month,
Mm.
fortunes of our election radically realigned, and he was rejected.
Yeah.
Right now, he is not even a politician in our parliament. The same thing happened in Australia just a week
Yeah.
ago. So I see here people rising up and organizing and saying, like, no, not us, not now. And maybe we'll continue to go back and forth. I don't think that is the end of authoritarianism in Canada or Australia. But for the time being, it's a victory and we have to celebrate. So the opportunity to fight back is still here. We just have to muster the will.
Mm. Look at Canada giving main character energy.
I think I think because as you said, what's my message to them? And for me, it's I hope you get what you want. And
Mm.
what I mean by that is also I hope you surround yourself with people that will help you understand what you want. Right.
Mm.
And I think that analogy with Canada and Australia is, those are our friends, and they were surrounded by us, and we got to help them see what they want, right?
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
there's better ways to do that, but the reality is, if you're seeking what you want honestly and earnestly, and you're surrounding yourself with people that will challenge and help you stay either committed or challenged to what it is you want. And then the third part is I hope you are someone that helps others find what they want. Because if you're committed to those three things, then maybe you'll go down some of these paths, but you'll go down faster, right? And I say that as somebody who's made plenty of mistakes and been down plenty of paths, and I don't I wish I hadn't gone down them, but the lesson I take from them I wouldn't give away, and so I only wish I had gone down them faster, right? And so staying committed to identifying, finding out, figuring out what you want, surrounding yourself with people that will help you identify and follow through on what you want, and then being the person that helps other people do the same. That's community. And when you have community surrounded from you, then these short-term things that are fear-based generally don't last very long.
Wow. Brian, Dr. Neil, um, I was having a conversation with my 12-year-old, and he was asking me about all of these messages and things he sees online, mostly on YouTube, because my kids don't have social media yet. And he was saying, Mommy, it seems like there are all these women that hate men. And I said, I I can understand how it might seem that way, but it sounds to me like you're seeing the end of the story. What's the why? What's the beginning of the story? And if you start there, you might come to a different conclusion. And I love that I think both of you are inviting everyone to go back to that curiosity, to that connection, that storytelling that only happens in relationship to another. And that's on both sides of this, or on this spectrum of this gender equation. Thank you both for taking the time out today. Thank you, Dr. Neil, for braving all the people who will inevitably attack you on social media for talking to Americans. We apologize.
No need.
Of
Thank you.
our country, except not really. At least I don't. Brian has to, but Black women didn't vote for this. We all know that.
Sure.
So I'm leaving that in Brian's cup. Brian, thank you for being here. And everyone, reach out to Brian and Dr. Neil on social media. Don't say any shit that's going to get you blocked, as you heard today. Hey, they're not trying to fuck around and find out. Fuck around once, and you go and find out. As Brian and Dr. Neil said, you're always going to be a teacher. So whether that's by a lesson or being somebody's warning, go out and teach somebody today. Goodbye, everyone.